The long-awaited New South Wales abortion debate on the Radical Greens bill kicked off last Wednesday in the upper house. We were all waiting with bated breath to see what Labor would do. The first cab off the rank was Penny Sharpe, a senior pro-abortion member of the Labor Party. What did she say and what did it mean reading between the lines? And that's today on The Dr. Jo Show. It's so good to see all of you guys again for another episode of the show, and I want to thank you for all of your support thus far. We've hit 8,500 subscribers, which is just so cool, and I'm really grateful to each of you. Please subscribe. Please pass this around to others and tell them to subscribe. A special shout out to Sean Freeborn, who for my birthday sent through this. I don't know if you guys can see it. It says The Dr. Jo Show. It's a coaster. I'm very excited. My first merch, although I'm not selling it. It's just for me. Thank you, Sean, for making it for me. It made me feel very special and loved. And thank you everybody who's been sending through birthday wishes, and also for all of your comments. I know I've been terrible at replying to them, but I promise that I've actually been reading every single one. So I'm very grateful that, you guys are really continuing the conversation in the comments after the show. So today on the show, we're unpacking the speech of Penny Sharpe. Now, she is an aggressively pro-abortion MP in the Labor Party. She was one of the architects of abortion up to birth in New South Wales in 2019, one of the fiercest, strongest advocates for abortion up to birth without any restriction within the party and outside of the party. Now, we were told by Labor that she would be speaking on Wednesday night, and we were told that it would signal Labor's position somewhat on this bill. Although, remember, they've got this sort of fake conscience vote going on. Ultimately, they have decided within the party what they're going to do, and they're going to continue to decide that in caucus. As I've been telling you on the show, when they say it's a conscience vote, they don't actually really mean that it's a conscience vote. They definitely have a view about what they're going to do and about how they want this bill to work out. There are a lot of pro-abortion forces within the party, and so Penny Sharpe is one of the main leaders of that. So we were waiting to see what would she say, and there were certainly some really important clues and signals in her speech with her love and her commitment to abortion. Let's watch.
Members well know that what my conscience says about abortion law reform. It's fundamental, it's healthcare, it's fundamental to the lives of women and others who are required to be able to make choices that are in their best interest in their lives.
This would be the public position of 99% of Labor MPs. Abortion is healthcare, it's vital for women's empowerment, it's vital for women's health. Note that when we hear these kinds of slogans from pro-abortion MPs, there's no kind of distinguishing. It's not abortion at 6 weeks is healthcare, but abortion at full term isn't. There's nothing about that abortion can only be used to save the life of the mother. There's no concerns raised about killing babies just because they're girls or because of the race that they have or because they've got some kind of disability. It's just a blanket motherhood statement. Abortion is healthcare. And so when an MP like Penny Sharpe gets up and says that and frames the debate like that, we know that what she's really saying is that the dominant party is allowed to subjugate the weaker party. When she says that it's fundamental for people to make choices about their lives, what she's saying is that it's fundamental and essential for the stronger party, the party with the recognised human rights under the law, to be able to make decisions about what they do with the weaker party who has no voice and no recognised rights under the law, who are currently residing in the mother's body. We've got to be really clear that when a so-called progressive left politician stands up and makes this claim, abortion is healthcare and there's no caveats at all, what they're really saying is that abortion, it is okay to kill intentionally and deliberately a human being through all 40 weeks of pregnancy and without any regards to the human rights of that human being inside the mother's womb. So after making that statement, which we knew she would make because she is part of the pro-abortion agenda within the party and publicly, she then moves on to an analysis of Amanda Con's bill and also the statutory review that preceded the bill. So when, just a quick explainer, when New South Wales legislated abortion up to birth in 2019, they committed to doing a 5-year review of the Act. It's now been 5 years, so there's been a review commissioned by New South Wales Health. Now, it's very disappointing that this was done within the department as opposed to an external review, as opposed to appointing an independent expert to review the system and to see how it's operated. There's some major problems with the way the review was conducted, and you can look at my past YouTube videos which go through in forensic detail. Now, interestingly, Amanda Con has said that this review is the basis for her bill, when in fact her bill takes it much further and doesn't actually incorporate the recommendations of the review. The review made one recommendation for legislative change, and yet her bill makes 4 legislative change recommendations. So we're going to go through that in a bit of detail, partly because Penny Sharpe does that. She looks at the review and then she explains what she's going to do on this bill. So let's take a look.
3. The review considered the operation of the Act since its commencement, particularly eligibility and requirements of health practitioners to provide terminations, including who can perform a termination, requirements to provide information about counselling, and requirements related to conscientious objection, and notification requirements by health practitioners as outlined in Section 15 of the Act. Written submissions were provided to the review from key stakeholders, including organisations directly involved in the operation of the Act and those who support and represent health practitioners. Expert advice for the review also came from the New South Wales Health Safe Access to Abortion Care Working Group.
What Penny Sharpe is indicating, and reading between the lines, she's also signalling that Labor will do this too. They're saying that there was this review by New South Wales Health and it's going to form the basis of what they do on Amanda Con's bill. Now, as I said at the outset, Amanda Con's bill does 4 things. This review only recommends 1 thing of the 4. In fact, her bill takes it way further and does things that the review itself, this very pro-abortion review itself, doesn't even do. But what I want to make clear with you guys is that the review is no basis for legislative change. The review is one of the worst pieces of research, if you can call it that I've ever seen. Penny Sharpe indicates some of the methodology problems, not that she indicates that they're problems, but she shows you what some of the methodology was. So she said that there were key stakeholder groups that were consulted in the method, and these are organisations who are directly involved in the process of abortion, and they also received expert advice from the New South Wales Health Safe Access to Abortion Care Working Group. So what this should red flag for you straight away is that this is an extremely biased, selective piece of research. So they didn't do a quantitative analysis of the impact of the bill, of how many abortions there have been since 2019, how many late-term abortions, how many for sex selection, how many for disability, how many complications there were. There is none of that analysis in the bill, in the review. In fact, what's striking in the review is that there's no data. It's just selective, qualitative data from anonymous stakeholders. So 35 written submissions were given. And if you look at the appendix, you can see that by and large, from what I can tell, 90% of the stakeholders are people who have a vested interest in abortion in New South Wales. They're actually the abortionists who were consulted in the writing of this report reviewing the abortion up to birth bill that was introduced in 2019. This is not an independent review. It's being done within the department, New South Wales Health, that implements abortion up to birth. And the people that they consulted were abortion providers and abortionists or abortion advocates. And then there's this Safe Access to Abortion Care Working Group. Well, everybody on that working group, given the name of it, is invested in the business of abortion. So this is not an independent review. It's a stitch-up, and it shouldn't be used as the basis for legislative change. And when you read this piece of work, which would not get through any peer review process in any journal in the world, it's just that bad, what you'll see is that they use anonymous quotes from these 35 stakeholders who have a vested interest in more abortion. It doesn't even identify who the quotes are from, and that way you can't even say, well, this quote is from Marie Stopes International, a key abortion provider, the biggest abortion provider in the country. So you can't even know, okay, well, that quote came from that person, therefore that's the perspective that they're speaking from. I mean, when you watch this channel, I'm very clear about the fact that I'm critical of abortion, that I believe in the protection of human rights of children in utero. So you know my normative perspective. In this report, they pretend and use the veneer of independence and objectivity to push a normative pro-abortion position. So Penny Sharpe and Labor want to hide behind this very biased report as the basis for their position on Con's bill, when in fact it shouldn't be used as the basis for anything. After explaining that this shonky review is going to be the basis for her decision-making on this bill, Penny Sharpe then goes into analysing the 4 things that the bill does and explaining what her position is. Let's watch.
The bill before the House today does 4 things. Firstly, the bill would require the Minister for Health to ensure abortion services are provided throughout the state within a reasonable distance of residents' homes. This initiative was not a recommendation of the statutory review of the Abortion Law Reform Act, and it's unclear how it could be reasonably achieved in practice. There is no other aspect of healthcare where we try to place this into legislation. I understand what the member is trying to do here, which is to make sure that the access issues are dealt with, but this is not the way that I would support doing this, and it's not an aspect of the bill that I support at this point.
So this is a key moment in Penny Sharpe's speech where she's signalling that she, and if she's the most or one of the most pro-abortion people in Labor and she's not even supporting this, then it's very likely that Labor won't support this. And this is a flagship aspect of Con's bill. It's the reason for the bill. It's the fact that they want to force all hospitals, as a condition of receiving funding, to provide abortions. That's Greens' policy federally, and this bill is the first attempt to try and introduce that in any state or territory. And in Con's bill, it says if the Minister for Health gives a directive to a public health organisation that they must perform abortions, then that organisation must comply. Now, very clearly here, Sharpe says, I'm not going to support that. I don't think that was recommended by the review, but we also don't think that that's what we're going to do. Now, what's really clear then is that momentum for Con's bill is collapsing even before it gets off the ground. This is literally the first speech in the debate. And the most pro-abortion person in the Labor Party is saying, I don't support this flagship aspect of your piece of legislation. So, already the pro-abortion consensus around Con is collapsing. Now, remember, she's consulted heavily with pro-abortion forces in Labor and in the Parliament over her bill. In her second reading speech, she thanks all of these people that she's consulted with, and yet we can see the effects of our public campaign because of our public rally, which got over 5,000 people, our letterbox drops, all of the calling and emailing that you're doing. It is making an effect if that's the speech Penny Sharpe is now getting up to give, because she clearly believes in abortion. She clearly believes in abortion access, and she says that at multiple times during the speech, but yet she's not supporting, and therefore we think Labor probably is not supporting this aspect of the bill. Now, as I said in previous videos, we cannot rest on our laurels. It is very possible that they are trying to talk us off the cliff, talk us down because there's a federal election going on and they don't want this to hurt Albanese. And the reality is this debate on the bill will kick off again on May 6th, which is after the federal election passes. So as I've said, I don't trust politicians. She has said she's not going to vote for this amendment, but we have no idea whether that will change, whether Con will look like she amends the amendment a bit, and then Sharpe gets up and says, oh, well, look, it's been amended sufficiently, so yes, happy to support it now. So we cannot rest on our laurels. If anything, we have to ramp up. But this is a good sign that the momentum around Con's bill is collapsing even at the very start. The second aspect of Con's bill is about whether midwives and nurse practitioners should be involved and performing abortions. Let's take a look at what Sharpe says about that.
I do, however, as I said earlier, strongly support endorsed midwives and nurse practitioners being able to provide medical terminations for those that seek them.
She then goes on to say this.
Most importantly for me, this is a change that will make it easier for those seeking terminations to be able to access them, particularly those in rural and regional areas where we know there remains a problem around access.
So this is the bit that was in the statutory review. It said that nurses and midwives should be able to become abortionists, and this is the bit that Sharpe is flagging that her and Labor will enact from the Con bill. And so this should be a massive red flag to us, a big concern about what Labor's position is, because what they're saying is they are happy, in fact, they support midwives and nurses being turned into abortionists, into people that kill babies. And in the review, what's really interesting, so the statutory review looks at this issue, and it's the only recommendation that they make. And it's looking at what are the eligibility requirements to access or to provide an abortion. And it says here that the majority of submissions support allowing nurses and midwives to become abortionists. Again, when they say the majority of submissions, it's not like they've polled everybody. It's not like they've got a representative sample of the community or even a representative sample of health workers. They haven't asked nurses and midwives about this. The only people that they've asked are abortionists, about abortion providers. And there were 2 Catholic organisations on this. So we don't know, there's 2 quotes from people from organisations who express some concern about this rapid expansion of chemical drugs being administered by nurses and midwives. And we don't know whether they're from the two Catholic organisations, but only 35 were consulted, and they don't indicate who says what. But there is this safety concern that's identified, and it says here, the diagnosis and exclusion of ectopic pregnancy prior to medical abortion is absolutely vital, but it can be difficult. And if missed prior to medical abortion being commenced, severe, possibly fatal complications may result. We believe that the clinical management of women undergoing medical abortion is beyond the scope of practice for nurses and endorsed midwives. So there's clearly one stakeholder on this review who's sounding the alarm and saying this could be very dangerous. But then this stitch up of a review says these concerns were not broadly shared. And with respect to clinical safety, other respondents noted that they were not aware of any situations where expansion of eligibility of health practitioners to perform abortions within their scope of practice has led to any negative consequences. So just there with that interplay between two opposing voices, you can really see how hollow and misleading this is as a method of research. Essentially what they're doing is they've asked a bunch of people what they think about something, and then they've selectively chosen quotes and framed them in a way so as to present a particular perspective, the normative perspective of New South Wales Health and what they want. So, we know that New South Wales Health and Labor, who is government at the moment in New South Wales, they want midwives and nurses to become abortionists. This was a policy that Albanese at the federal level allowed to happen. It was the Labor federal government that changed the rules around nurses and midwives prescribing. Now what you need for that to occur in New South Wales is you need legislative change in New South Wales. So Albanese kicked this off federally. Now what we see is the Minns Labor government, through the voice of Sharpe, indicating to us that they want this to happen in New South Wales. And this review, which they commissioned, which is supposedly independent, but really it's being done by New South Wales Health, what it does is it says, okay, so we've got one voice that says a safety concern, but then they say these concerns were not broadly shared. Well, no shit that they weren't broadly shared. You asked abortionists, they're not going to be open about the complications. And if we look at SA data, because South Australia is the only jurisdiction in the country which really provides clear data on the complication rate. There's a 6% complication rate with chemical abortions or medical abortions, as opposed to a 1% complication rate for surgical abortions. And so killing a baby via the woman taking pills in her own home, as opposed to the woman going into hospital and killing the baby surgically, it's a significantly higher rate of complication. In South Australia, it says that there were 198 women who had complications after taking MS2-step, which is the drug regime, and 172, so 87%, had retained products of conception. So what that means is bits of the baby were left inside, and that can go sepsis, and that's potentially lethal for women. And women have died from MS2-step, both in Australia and internationally. And yet none of that data from Australia or the complication rate or any of it is presented in the New South Wales Health Report. And that's because of this ideological agenda that they want nurses and midwives to become abortionists. And so the problem with this review is that it's an incredibly small and biased sample, and yet it's being used to represent the views of all nurses and midwives in New South Wales, when in fact we had a nurse speak at the rally, and she clearly said this is not what we want. We didn't become nurses and midwives to kill babies, to kill vulnerable human beings. We went into this profession because we want to heal and we want to help. Let's take a look at what she said.
I stand today before you as a nurse of 20 years. I'm also a voice for the passionate healthcare workers that I work with that feel that they're abandoned, unheard, and deeply distressed by the relentless expansion of abortion in our healthcare system. A lot of you are religious, but I'm not one of those people. But not being religious, I can unequivocally tell you that you don't need to be religious to know the difference from right and wrong. Know that it's wrong to kill babies. It's wrong to force healthcare professionals to be complicit in the killing of the most innocent of us.
And it's not just her that feels this way. I'm going to be sharing on my YouTube interviews with 3 further health workers, a junior doctor, a nurse and a midwife, who've all come forward and said that they don't want this to happen in New South Wales. And so, that's something that we're going to have to really do. And if you're a health worker watching this channel, I just encourage you to get in touch with me and our team, because I'd like to share your story too. It is time that we started speaking up, because it's the only way that we're going to be able to push back on this rampant pro-abortion ideology. that will change the very nature of what it means to be a nurse and midwife. Now, Con and Sharpe would say, well, you still get to choose whether you prescribe the pills or not. But what one of the midwives that I spoke to said is what it does is it creates pressure. It creates this environment of we're short-staffed, we just need to deal with this woman who wants an abortion. Can you just prescribe this pill? And it just changes the nature of what it means to be in that profession. It creates a lot of pressure on them. And it means you have to be extraordinarily strong to push back and say, I'm a conscientious objector and I'm not going to do it. And that is beyond the courage level of a lot of people. It also makes you slightly less useful in the workplace. It makes you a less efficacious nurse or midwife, and it may mean that when they're recruiting these organisations, they become aware of this as part of their recruitment, and they specifically recruit for nurses and midwives who can do abortions. And we saw that with an ad that Queensland Health put out last year. They were specifically recruiting for someone that would do abortions, and that means that there's less availability for work for everybody else who doesn't want to do this.
But to be very clear, there is some good intent in this. I really do believe it's important that nurse practitioners are able to prescribe, and I believe it's a really important part of it. I do disagree with some of the other elements in relation to the bill, partly because I understand how difficult it was to get the balance right in 2019. Partly because I do just have a different view in relation to the member of how you achieve what you're trying to achieve, and that I don't believe that necessarily putting into legislation actually fixes the problem.
So 2 things to unpack from there. What she's indicating is she supports the bill proceeding to committee stage. She's going to look at the amendments there. She's going to support amendments that are in line with the statutory review. So that's what she's saying now. That's indicating to us what Labor's position will be, which means that, you know, at the start of our campaign, it was likely that Labor and the Greens were going to get this through quickly. 4 out of 4 were going to go through. Already it seems like our campaign is working and 3 out of 4 are really on shaky ground and momentum for Con is slipping. So that's a very positive thing. What she then goes on to say is, I believe that we got the balance right in 2019. I just want to call that out straight away because you're going to hear that rhetoric from politicians throughout the ensuing debate over the next couple of months. We got the balance right in 2019. No, you didn't. You actually dominated. There was the media and the parliament that just combined. Like the pro-abortion forces were just so strong in 2019. And even though 10,000 people marched against the bill, ultimately that web of forces was so strong that abortion up to birth was introduced for any reason in New South Wales. Sex-selective abortion wasn't even banned. There was not any compromise made. It's a bill that forces doctors and nurses to refer for abortion, so to become complicit in it. It wasn't a balanced act. And they now, because they got everything they wanted, they talk this language of balance and moderation to try and make it sound like they were reasonable, but they were not. They were not reasonable. This was a law that is now the most extreme abortion law in the world. There's only a handful of countries that have laws as extreme as this on abortion. And so, you know, for her to talk a language of balance, you need to know that when you hear that, actually it's a language of extreme radicalisation on the issue of abortion. The third thing she says, though, and this is the most sinister part, and I really wanted you guys to hear it, she looks at Amanda Con, who's sitting there. Now, you can't see this in the video, but I was there, so I saw all of this exchange. She looks at Amanda Con and she says, you know, I support so much of what you're trying to do. I can see where you're going with this. Our objectives are the same, but ultimately I have a different view of how we get there. And this is the thing that just really freaks me out, because Con's trying to do this through legislation, but what Sharpe is essentially indicating is you don't have to make a big song and dance about, you know, pushing abortion on everyone. You can do it behind the scenes through policy and through New South Wales Health. And, you know, that's the bit that is really quite frightening and scary, because, you know, she talks elsewhere in the speech about the things that New South Wales Health and Labor Health Minister Ryan Parks are doing. So, you know, a new training program around conscientious objection. So Con's trying to get it into the bill and passed as law that everybody's got to be involved in abortion. You have to actively transfer your patient to the person that will kill the baby. And so Con's trying to do that through legislation. Sharpe turns to her and says, oh, you know, don't do it that way. we can do it this way. We're going to be having training programs that we're rolling out across the state. And you can imagine what that's like. You know, if you're a health worker and you don't want to be involved in abortion and you're being forced to sit through this very patronising, authoritarian program which explains to you the very limited way that you can operate your conscience, you're going to feel increasingly oppressed in this line of work. And it is really frightening to think of these individual health workers who don't have any voice. The unions and the peak bodies have totally been captured by the pro-abortion agenda, so they've got no one representing them. And they're these individual health workers up against this big corporation of New South Wales Health, you know, this huge entity, and they have no power. They have no voice. And Sharpe's just sort of winking at Con and saying, don't worry, we don't have to get your bill through, we can do it another way. And that is scary to me. And that's why we actually need to be really vigilant about what's going on, not just through legislation, but also through policy. And in case you think I'm over-egging the analysis there, she makes it crystal clear what team she's on in her next statement. Let's watch.
I thank Dr. Amanda Con for her consultative approach to working on this bill. And I understand and I share her support for effective and equitable access to abortion care throughout New South Wales. We definitely have different ideas about the way to get there, while I believe that the objective is sound. Everyone should be able to access abortion care they need, regardless of where they live or how much money they have. Abortion care is health care. This bill is another contribution to that debate and the evolution of a system that works for everyone in New South Wales.
So there you have it. Abortion care is health care. I support the objective of this bill. I thank Amanda Con for bringing this bill, which is a contribution to enabling us to ensure abortion care is health care. So what is actually remarkable when you think about it, if that's really what Penny Sharpe thinks, is that she gave this speech where she indicates 3 out of the 4 parts she's not going to support. She's so pro-abortion that she is lockstep with Amanda Con. She really should be in the Greens. The left of the Labor Party, which is the faction Sharpe is from, is very much in line with the Greens. They have so much more in common with the Greens than they do with Labor right, with members of their own party but who are in a different faction. That's how radical they are. But what is really the miracle of all of this is that Sharpe has given a speech that I think none of us would ever have expected her to give, given her pro-abortion pedigree. So all of this to say, we need to strap in for a long fight, because while the Labor Party via Sharpe is giving us good indications now, and later on in the weeks ahead, I'm going to be looking at Rose Jackson and other Labor speeches that have been made around this bill. But you know, right now, the signs are looking good that 3 out of the 4 we have killed. But the most important part of the bill, the bit about turning vulnerable health workers into abortionists, you know, think about your sisters, your mothers, your daughters, your friends, like people that you know, the women in your own life who have gone into this vocational work because they care about people and babies. They're caring. That's why they became health workers. You know, Sharpe, Jackson, Labor, Minns, they're lockstep with Albanese and with Con in turning them, enforcing them to become abortionists. So that is a major issue with the bill. We haven't locked in the 3 out of the 4. We've still got one really key aspect that is horrific and that we need to defeat. So there's a lot we have to do. Thank you for joining me today, and I look forward to seeing you next time on The Dr. Jo Show.